Okay, so here's a comparative test. I'm going to do this using the motherboard audio, then I'm going to do it again using an external audio interface. All right, so not that one. I want Live's preferences. All right, so we're just using MacBook Pro speakers, although I have the volume down so you won't hear anything. 48 kilohertz, 128 sample rate, latency is this, okay? Because there's no input device, so we're just doing in the box. So down here, we're capturing Live's CPU usage, and I've got the CPU history that shows the efficiency and the performance cores. What I have here is 8 tracks. This machine has 8 performance cores, and it's a Serum and a Multipoly, and a Serum and a Multipoly, and these are using the instruments presets that you suggested, Garen. So Serum's doing this Doors to the Secret Place. They're all doing that. And the Multipoly is doing the preset that you made called Shape of Things to Come. Every MIDI clip is the same. They're just playing a 5-note chord. Okay. And interestingly, what we'll see is, as you can see with these instances loaded, the Ableton CPU meter says it's 26 to 29%. I read an article about macOS Silicon with the most recent versions of Live 11.3 and 12, and it says Live is actually talking to the operating system and preparing to play audio, and so it's actually built itself a little buffer here. I'm not sure what the mechanics are, but there are links in the Ableton. There's an article on it in the Ableton help section on reducing CPU latency, specifically on Mac OS with the Silicon stuff. Ableton like sort of primes the pump and says, I'm going to be needing more here, so be prepared to give it to me to try and prevent anything from starving. And as we saw, that this meter isn't CPU usage, it's the percentage representing, what was it, buffer input versus buffer output, I think is what it was. Anyway, so interesting thing happens here. So we'll start with 2 instances. So these are running, right? And our live, our actual machine usage on CPU went up to about 200%. And we're sitting here in live at about 63-ish, averaging around 63%, right? And these efficiency cores haven't done anything, but the performance cores have ticked up, right? And so my buffer size is at 128, which is what's recommended from Ableton for Apple Silicon to convince the computer that the live stuff wants to live on the performance cores. Don't try and put it on the efficiency cores. And so we're seeing that here, a little bump here and a significant bump here, and there's a bit here, right? Everything went up just a little bit there. But our CPU meter, our percent of that buffer that's being used, is sitting right at, what is that, 63? It's averaging, fluctuating between 59 and I see peaks around 67. Okay. Let's start the next one. So here's 2 more instances running. This is interesting. When I start this up, my CPU meter here ticks up like 5% average. It just ticks up a bit, but 2 more cores are engaged. And the system CPU says now, instead of about 200%, it's 320%. Right? So we'll let that settle for a second, and then we'll start the next 2 instances. Those are running now. Our CPU for the system has jumped to about 400% now. You could see this 2 new spikes coming up. All right, these performance cores are now engaged. This one perhaps a bit. And the sort of buffer comparison thing took another sort of 5% jump, right? Not a significant jump. And then we'll start the last 2. So now we got the final 2 instances. So 4 Serums and 4 Multipolys running those patches. They're playing the same notes and they're playing them in sequence. They're synced to the bar. But now we've got one other core now being engaged. And if anything, at this point, some of the other cores got a little spikier, right? These are sort of matching. This took a jump, so this is taking some of the load too, it looks like. I don't know how to predict like what work's being done on what cores, and I'm not sure I care or that we're supposed to. But CPU for the system now for live is sitting just under 500%, hitting like 490s, 480s, 490s. And these are running. And if I bring up my... Yeah, the audio's clear, there's no dropouts. I'm starting to see in the performance course the little red sort of stress bands at the bottom of it, indicating that it's kind of taxed. I'm not sure exactly what that indicates, but... And that's that. All right. Now, I want to run this again, but I'm going to connect it to an external interface, and we'll see if there's any difference. Okay, we're back. So the only change that I've made is now we are talking out to the MOTU 828. All right, but it's same sample rate, same buffer size, latency's lower. It's still just out. We're not taking anything in. Latency's lower just because for whatever reason, the motherboard audio has a higher latency than going out USB-C to the 828, right? Different audio interfaces are going to have different drivers and different performance. So we'll ostensibly say the 828 performs better as far as latency is concerned, output latency, than the motherboard audio. Okay, but that's where we're at. I should also mention that as far as things that are running in the background, we are capturing using ScreenFlow, and I've also got Discord running in the background as well. Yeah, ScreenFlow captures running up here. But we're pretty well settled here. So let's start it again. Live's again sitting around 70 CPUs. The CPU's quite lower now. And I don't know if the audio interface makes a difference, but whereas before using the motherboard audio by default, it was hovering around 20 or 30%, swapping out the interface has reduced both system CPU and Live's measure of that buffer in-out behavior. So let's start it going again. So there's 2 instances. Immediately it jumps up to about the same, 55 to 67, right? So we're in that zone. So this would imply that regardless of how many cores are in use, the software, as far as processing audio, the in versus out buffer is being read at the same rate, which seems reasonable to me, right? You're not going to start having dropouts or struggling until you start overloading the cores, which isn't the exercise here, right? But there's 2. So we got a jump and a jump, some increase down here, a little bit here. So I'm not sure what it's spreading across, but it's doing something. We'll start the next 2. And I'm listening for dropouts in my headphones, right? So with 4 instances running there, 4 tracks, 257. So the system CPU performance looks to be tracking about the same, and as does this, the internal live CPU sort of buffer reading meter. It's really it's very confusing that they call it CPU meter, but then the article about it says it's not actually CPU load, it's audio processing sort of buffer in versus out. So there's 3 instances running. And I'm not even going to wait for it to settle. I'm going to start a 4th. All right, and now our CPU is back just as we saw it in the last one. It's hovering around 500%, 480 to 500%. And our system, our in-live sort of meter is still hovering around 67 to 70%. I know from my own experience, when this starts hitting over 80, I start getting dropouts. But at least for these 8 tracks with my 8 cores, life is good. It doesn't seem to really even be sweating. And, you know, these are, this is, especially the Serum one that Garen found is like a brute preset. But anyway, so that's the result. I don't know what that means, but we can compare. But I will note that the one thing that's different, that I swapped out the interface, the latency is half what it was on the motherboard. So depending on the interface you're using, right, your latency is impacted way more by the interface and its drivers than it is by the CPU you're using, right? So this is an M1. All CPU really impacts is at a given buffer size latency, can you run more stuff, right? Have more processing going on within this single for each audio stream that's being processed. And in live, each stream gets 1 core-ish, is what they say. So anyway, food for thought. We're out.